Unjustified and unexplained was how the head of NATO described Russia's build-up of troops on its border with Ukraine after a meeting with Ukraine's foreign minister in Brussels.
Russia must end this military build-up in and around Ukraine.
And a brutal new front has erupted in eastern Ukraine. Russia's full-scale push on Pokrovsk has begun. Russia unleashed a 170,000-strong force in Donbass heartland. Ukraine fights back.
Why NATO keeps moving closer to Russia. Putin calls it a threat. NATO members call it protection. Over the past 75 years, this military alliance has moved closer and closer to Russia's borders. What started in 1949 as a small group of 12 countries in Western Europe has now grown into a powerful bloc, stretching deep into Eastern Europe. To some countries, joining NATO means safety. It means having strong allies who will stand with them if they are attacked. But to Russia, this expansion tells a very different story. It looks like pressure. It feels like being surrounded. Every new country that joins NATO changes the balance. Every expansion moves the line closer to Russia's edge, and each step increases tension between both sides. Even small changes on the map can shift military strategy and influence decisions made by leaders. So why does NATO keep expanding? And why does Russia see it as such a serious threat? To answer that, we need to go back to the very beginning, Europe. After World War II ended in 1945, but peace did not bring stability right away. Europe was damaged, divided, and uncertain about the future. Cities were destroyed, economies were weak, millions of people had lost their homes, countries were trying to rebuild, but fear was still everywhere. At the same time, a new concern was rising in the East. The Soviet Union had grown stronger during the war. It controlled large parts of Eastern Europe and had a powerful military. Western European countries were worried. They feared that Soviet influence might spread further into their region. They needed a way to protect themselves. This fear slowly turned into the Cold War, 1947 to 1991. It was not a direct war, but a long period of tension between two sides with very different ideas. During this time, both sides competed for influence without fighting a full-scale war. This situation pushed Western countries to think about forming an alliance. Why NATO was created. In April 4th, 1949, NATO was officially created. It started with 12 countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Their goal was simple: protect each other. The key idea behind NATO is called collective defense. This is written in Article 5 of the treaty. It means if one member is attacked, all members will respond. This made smaller countries feel safer. They were no longer alone. For the United States, it was a way to stay involved in Europe and stop Soviet influence from spreading further. At that time, NATO was not moving toward Russia. It was building a defensive line in Western Europe. This helped create a balance of power that kept large-scale war from happening during the Cold War years. But this balance would not last forever. Cold War divides Europe. As the Cold War grew, Europe split into two clear sides. On one side was NATO. On the other side was the Soviet Union. In May 14, 1955, the Soviet Union formed the Warsaw Pact as its own military alliance. Now, Europe had two competing systems. The border between them became physical. Walls, fences and checkpoints divided East and West. The most famous example was the Berlin Wall, 1961 to 1989. Families were separated, travel was restricted, crossing from one side to the other was not easy, and in many cases it was dangerous. Both sides built weapons and prepared for possible conflict. During this time, NATO expanded slightly, but mostly stayed in Western Europe. The real shift would come after the Cold War ended. Early NATO expansion phase. Even before the Cold War ended, NATO started to grow. In 1952, Greece and Turkey joined. In 1955, West Germany joined. These moves strengthened NATO's position in Europe, but the expansion was still limited. It stayed within the western side. For decades, the line between NATO and the Soviet Union remained stable. Both sides avoided crossing into each other's areas. This created a tense but controlled balance. Even though both sides were powerful, they avoided direct conflict because of the risk of escalation. That balance finally broke in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Soviet collapse changes everything. In December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. This changed everything. Countries in Eastern Europe became independent. They were no longer under Soviet control. For the first time, they could decide their own future. Many of these countries wanted security, and NATO offered exactly that. So a new question appeared: should NATO expand into Eastern Europe? For those countries, the answer was yes. But for Russia, this moment was a loss of power and influence. It also meant losing control over regions that had once acted as a buffer zone. And now NATO was preparing to move closer. This is where the tension really began to grow. NATO moves eastward. Starting in 1999, NATO began expanding into former Soviet-influenced areas. Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic joined first. Then in 2004, a major expansion happened. 7 more countries joined, including Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. These countries are right next to Russia. This changed the map completely. NATO was no longer far away. It was now near Russia's borders. More countries like Romania and Bulgaria also joined, showing that the expansion was spreading across the region. This made NATO presence stronger across Eastern Europe. From NATO's view, this was about safety. From Russia's view, it looked like a steady advance. The distance between both sides was shrinking, and the room for misunderstanding was also becoming smaller. Russia sees NATO expansion as a serious risk. From its point of view, NATO is moving closer, step by step. Russian leaders have said that they believed NATO would not expand east after the Cold War. Even though this was never written as a formal agreement, the belief still matters. There is also a military concern. NATO has strong armies and advanced weapons. If these are placed closer to Russia, response time becomes shorter in case of conflict. This creates fear. It also increases pressure on military planning and defense systems inside Russia. Vladimir Putin has warned many times that NATO expansion is a threat. From his view, this is about security and control. Both sides believe they are acting in defense. That is what makes the situation so tense. Finland and Sweden shift position. For many years, Finland and Sweden stayed neutral, but after the Ukraine war in 2022, things changed. Finland officially joined NATO on April 4, 2023. This added over 1,300 kilometers of NATO border with Russia. Sweden also applied and is moving closer to full membership. This shows that NATO is still growing even today. Countries that once stayed neutral are now choosing sides. This shift shows how security concerns in Europe are changing again. For NATO, this means stronger defense. For Russia, it confirms its fears. The gap between both sides is getting wider. Today, NATO has grown from 12 members to 32. It is one of the strongest military alliances in the world. At the same time, tensions with Russia are rising. Military activity is increasing. Trust is low. No one knows what will happen next. Will NATO keep expanding? Will Russia respond more strongly? Or will things calm down? The map of Europe is still changing, and each change brings risk. In the end, this is not just about land. It is about fear, trust, and security. Small decisions made today can shape global stability for years to come. And as those lines move closer, the stakes keep rising. If you found this story interesting, subscribe for more videos like this. There are many hidden stories in the world that most people never hear about. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.